I'm sure an incident like that has a traumatic effect on anyone, and he was no less sensitive than the rest of us. He never obviously talked about it. Clearly it impacted on his subsequent political career. But interestingly, the people of Massachusetts, where the accident had happened, the people of Massachusetts continued to support him. And I was very struck yesterday watching television clips of his funeral procession to the Mission Church in Boston.
Yes.
I was struck by, first of all, the numbers of people on the street, and secondly, the placards they were holding up. Thank you, Kennedy. So the people on whose support he relied clearly had forgiven him.
And he became, as President Obama said yesterday when he was addressing the funeral service, he became the patriarch of the Kennedy clan, even though he was the youngest in the family, because, of course, he really became a surrogate father to the children of both Bob Kennedy and Jack Kennedy as well.
Indeed, and there were, Bob and Ethel between them, I think, had 11 or 12 children. And he became the father to them, and I've often seen it on weekends in Cape Cod during the summer, the whole clan assembled.
Yes.
And he clearly, the leader, the big cheese, as they used to call him, and while he played with them, talked to them, he took them all, he took them very seriously, and he guided many of them. And again, yesterday at the funeral, one of his grandchildren talked about the joy of being with him, sitting in a porch at 7 o'clock in the morning as he looked out to the ocean, and she could talk to him about the world. And he treated, I often saw him and heard him talking to children in exactly the same way as he would talk to his colleagues in the Senate or people in the White House.
But he was a flawed human being, because as well, of course, we know he was a real womanizer, and his first marriage broke up. He was well known to fancy, as one of the booze and boobs was how I think Andrew Sullivan put it in the Sunday Times article today. Of course, he got remarried, and as far as we know, that was a successful marriage second time round. But he was.
But we're all flawed in many ways. The problem that Senator Kennedy had to face was every sin, be it a venial sin or a mortal sin, was covered by the media. And I often thought in Ireland over the last 20 years in particular, the newspapers, particularly the Sunday Independent never ever did a serious article about what Ted Kennedy was doing for Ireland. But any time they picked up a tidbit from the National Enquirer or equivalent rags in the States, they reproduced it. Anytime there was a saucy biography of Ted Kennedy, they did a chapter from it. It was quite offensive.
Do you believe he did play a very significant role in trying to forge peace for Northern Ireland?
Yes, I think for the last 35 years he was a huge friend of Ireland. Now, it was one thing to be a friend of Ireland, but to be as powerfully placed as he was in Washington, literally going back to President Nixon's day. His interest in Ireland, tied in with his very central position in Washington politics, made sure that Ireland got his support. We got it on many things. Obviously, it is best known because of his involvement in the peace process. Now, I think it's important to mention that from a very early stage, from 1972, when he first met John Hume, he was very heavily influenced on his Irish policy by John Hume, kept in close touch with him, and Hume's policy effectively became his policy.
Because I think it was his relationship with Hume which played a strong role in trying to see if NORAID could stop raising funds for the IRA in the States.
Yes, well, don't forget, he had lost two brothers to assassination, political violence. He was totally, utterly and completely opposed to the use of violence to achieve political objectives. And I think his primary motivation in attacking the IRA, which he did from a very early stage, was that he had seen in his immediate family what violence could do. So that was a huge issue with him. But then he went on from that, from 72 onwards, in addition to, in a sense, attacking the IRA and the Republican movement generally. He also wanted to find a positive way to help. And he did that essentially through whoever happened to be president. He would get the President of the United States to put pressure at appropriate times on the British Prime Minister. And
Yes.
that was very effective between, for example, when Reagan was president and Thatcher was Prime Minister in Britain. We were negotiating the Anglo-Irish Agreement, which was finally signed in 1985. There were a number of hiccups along the road negotiating that treaty. And on at least 2 occasions, our American friends put enough pressure on London to ensure that the negotiations were put back on track.
And Sean, when you were ambassador to Washington from 1978 to 1981, how easy was it for you to phone up Ted Kennedy and either ask for a meeting or maybe do a little bit of lobbying on your behalf or get some Irish vested interest perhaps heard in Congress?
Well, with my colleagues in the embassy at the time, we kept in touch with all the main offices of senators and congressmen who were interested in Ireland, particularly Tip O'Neill, who was Speaker, Ted Kennedy, Senator Moynihan from New York. We kept in very close, almost daily contact with these offices. And then if an issue reached a point where it needed the direct intervention of Senator Kennedy, there was no difficulty in getting a meeting with him. There was no difficulty in meeting him informally or in meeting him formally in his office. And his door was always open to visiting politicians from Ireland.
He's been trying to get universal health care for people in America for, I think he's been trying to get this for the last 40 years as health care, and now it looks like possibly his dream, although it will be a late dream for him, may come true if Obama manages to actually forge us through the houses.
Yeah. It would be a great tribute to him. As you say, he has been working on this since the 60s. But don't overlook the bits that he has already achieved. I mean, he was involved in the creation of Medicare. He was involved, as I said earlier, in setting up the National Cancer Institute. He was an extraordinary man for take what you can get now, even if it's not your full objective.
Yes.
But he always kept working towards
Yes.
the full objective. And he had, in his work, he had extraordinary energy and discipline. Quite extraordinary, which I think has never been fully acknowledged, particularly on this side of the Atlantic, and I mean both Britain and Ireland.
Actually, on the cancer issue, we have an interesting text from Professor Frank Sullivan, who's a professor of radiation oncology with NUI Galway. He says Ted Kennedy was also directly responsible for ensuring the US National Cancer Institute, the NCI, connected with the Irish Cancer Services as the NCI All-Ireland Cancer Consortium, which has successfully supported several important cancer projects in Ireland. He says that without him, it never would have happened. I thought what was very interesting yesterday when I was watching President Obama give the eulogy to the funeral service, that he spoke about how Ted Kennedy would write all these letters to people. And I spoke about this earlier during the review of the papers, how he wrote letters to the people who had lost loved ones during the 9/11 attacks on the trade towers, and other people as well throughout his life, that he was great at writing letters, very generous, very conscious of people who may not have been in his political sphere, and he stayed in contact with these people.
Yes, he was an extraordinary people person. You don't expect to find that in a big country like the United States. In a sense, he was almost like a local Irish politician who could walk around his parish and greet everyone he knew. A bit like Willie O'Dea walking the streets of Limerick and being able to identify everybody he sees on the street.
I'm sure Willie O'Dea would be very pleased with that. I'm not sure everybody.
But Ted Kennedy, no matter where you went with Ted Kennedy, he would recognise people. He would ask them about, a family member who might have been sick, or he would sympathise with somebody who had died. You just don't expect to get that in a country the size of the United States.